this pen exists. Does God exist? Does God have the same quality that this pen has?
Right.
You can't say that God exists. That's how trapped we are by language.
By language.
The hippies were right.
In my humble opinion, The Office is maybe the best written and acted comedy in TV history.
Thank you very much, sir.
And the character of Dwight, played by Rainn Wilson, is one of the greatest characters in TV history.
It's true.
Rainn has a book out called Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution, about his own spiritual exploration. And Alex O'Connor does a great job of going into deep territory with Rainn. So I'd like to play one segment where they talk about the limits of our understanding and the nature of God, because it's important to get our minds around what the Bible has to say about the kinds of things that they're talking about, the knowability of God. We'll start where Alex quotes Rainn's book, where Rainn is quoting a Baha'i faith scholar. Watch this.
Baha'u'llah's
Abdul-Baha.
Abdul-Baha. There's a quote from Abdul-Baha in your book.
Okay.
Page 98 for those following along at home. People have pictured a God in the realm of their mind, in the realm of the mind, and worship that image which they have made for themselves. Consider then how all the peoples of the world are bowing the knee to a fancy of their own contriving, how they have created a creator within their own minds, and they call it the fashioner of all that is. It's people.
Now, quick note on this, because it's very important for a later discussion, then I'll let it play out. That is a fantastic definition, according to the Bible, of what idolatry is: creating a God in our own image or in our own mind.
People worshipping their thoughts rather than worshipping the thing that their thoughts are supposed to point to.
Yeah.
I think that, so Thomas Aquinas famously thought that all religious language was analogy. And so God is not powerful. God is not knowing. God is not, any of these things, because these are human concepts that we use to sort of analogously think about the way that God kind of operates. But he's obviously not powerful in the way that a human is powerful, being able to lift heavy things and influence people and stuff like that. It's a totally incomprehensible notion, but we use these analogous terms. But now, if you ask the philosophers even, how do you define God? They'll say, oh, he's an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing, and perhaps
That's
in
the
doing
finger
so,
pointing at the moon.
Yeah, pointing at the thinking about the finger, the pointing at the finger itself, which is probably the wrong way of thinking about it. I think a lot of David Bentley Hart seems like someone that you've read.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure that one of his biggest critiques of the new atheism movement is that they're just thinking of the wrong kind of God. They've just got the wrong picture of what God is supposed to be. I mean, what do you think God is supposed to be?
Well, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? Well, yeah, because you could go even further than that, and you can say that to exist is a quality of the physical world. This pen exists. Does God exist? Does God have the same quality that this pen has?
Right.
I think the answer to that is yes and no. We'll talk about that in a minute.
You can't say that God exists, but again, that's how trapped we are by language.
By language, yeah.
So, yeah, I love David Bentley Hart. The Experience of God. His book is a seminal book for me, and that really illumined a new way of thinking about God. And I have a chapter in there I referenced before, the Notorious God, and I'm actually doing a documentary. I'm going to start next year doing a documentary called The Notorious God. I'd love to interview you for it.
That sounds great.
Are you up for that?
That sounds like great fun.
Okay. But this idea that God is much closer to an experience than a being with superpowers.
Yeah.
So Jesus said God is love. And the hippies were right in a way. Like, can God be closer to something more akin to music than to a dude? David Bentley Hart calls him like a demiurge. That's this old idea of a god with superpowers on a cloud, like striking you and giving you favors and and having opinions and whatnot. Can God be closer to physics and beauty than to any kind of being?
I love the fact that these kinds of things are being said and talked about. And I don't even really disagree with much of what they're saying, but I think we need to fill in some blanks when it comes to a biblical worldview, because they say, first of all, starting off, Thomas Aquinas did, I think, accurately say it, that all religious language is analogy language. And I I say in my sermons quite often, the Bible gives you things that you can see to help you understand the things that you cannot. It doesn't mean they're not real. It just means the Bible itself communicates in terms that we understand. But I would argue that that's the entire point. And taking it further, I noticed Rainn Wilson, he used, like a lot of people do, he used Jesus as an authority. And he quoted him. Jesus didn't say God was love. One of his apostles did, but he communicated the idea. But what Jesus did do is that he, for instance, this is a good example, he was famous, his most revolutionary idea to the people at that time, he wasn't the first one to say this, but the one that really pressed in was God as Father, for instance. So God as Father is designed to give us something that we can attach to, something we can understand because it communicates something meaningful. So in other words, God's communication, yes, all communication about God is going to have a limit to it, absolutely. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have meaning, because Father, for instance, has meaning. But that meaning doesn't work like this, where we have this crude image in our minds of some dude with a dad bod, and a long beard, and screaming for somebody to fix him a turkey pot pie or something like that. We have our own experience of Father or being a father, but we also typically have the ideal in our mind of what the ideal father would be, and that's a meaningful concept. So Jesus says, lock into that. The greatest theology lesson I ever received in my life was when my first child was born. And becoming a father at that moment, I had more understanding in that instant than I think I've ever had about anything else, because that father-child relationship kicked into gear, and it had a whole another meaning about it when it comes right down to that. And notice that he's saying, okay, well, maybe God is like music, or God is more like experience, which David Bentley Hart does say. By the way, if you ever read a David Bentley Hart book, bring your dictionary, okay? But I get that, but it's kind of depersonalizing it. Whereas if God is love, think about this. The Bible does argue that God is person. And it's not a person in a crude way, long beard and telling people what to do, but personhood contains the idea of consciousness, relationship. Love assumes relationship. So to get, and even you can't have music without person. You can't have all of these experiences that they're talking about, we're associating God with, without personhood. And that's why Jesus in the Bible is called the message of God personified. Basically, it's who God is communicated in the ultimate way that we can understand. So on one hand, I would say, yeah, these guys are right, and they're talking about something deeper. It goes beyond just mechanics, but we have to include the idea of personhood, because that's where all of our deep understanding. Think about your love in your life and how multidimensional it is. If you're married, or you have children, it's very practical, but it's also very mysterious almost. It's very feeling oriented and very experience oriented, but at the same time, it can be just kind of day-to-day conversation kind of thing. And in the Bible, since we're saying that we as human beings are created in the image of God, that gives meaning to it all. So God exists in that sense. And so, but great, really interesting conversation. If you want to get into more of how the Bible communicates, because I think it's very important to understand, here's a video that we did a while back where Joe Rogan was talking to a woman about just how the Bible does communicate in stories, even weird stories, because it's important to know that and why it does it. Hope that helps. See you next time.